All right, so recruiting updates. I will be honest, last time we did this, it turned into me and Chris basically talking about how Michigan wasn't doing very well in recruiting, and I tried to take it away from that multiple times, and I don't want to blame Chris because I kind of fed into it a little bit, but it was essentially a, Michigan's bad at recruiting conversation. So I had somebody did reach out though, a nice Michigan fan. There are them out there that I associate with at times. And he asked me, he said, will you please do the recruiting updates again? But if you talk about Michigan, please bring up the On3 rankings because Michigan is fifth. And he asked me, he said, why, if you know why, please explain why is Michigan fifth and On3 and why are they, I think they're 10th right now, last time I checked, in 24/7. Such a large disparity is intriguing. And he was curious why. Well, I'm not an expert, but what I do know about recruiting is that 24/7 takes like your entire class and just adds it all up. The sum of all the ratings of your guys type of deal, and 24/7, the one people typically use. I do believe it's probably most accurate at the end of the recruiting cycle. I don't know if it's the most accurate in the middle of it, just because, like, look at Rutgers right now with 27 commits. Like, that's a full class right there. So you're essentially getting their full class rating when other teams are still only halfway or 3/4 of the way done because they're guys who maybe are highly rated or higher rated are not ready to commit yet. But on what On3 does, and I don't know how they get to this number, but they find some number and they take that number of your highest recruits and find the average, and then that is your class ranking. So I think right now, last time I checked, On3 is at 11. So they take your 11 best players in your class, find the average rating of those 11 players, and then that's your class rating. I don't believe that is probably best for the end of the year, but if I was being honest, I think that's probably more accurate for where we're at right now, just because then that way you're not getting a full class versus a, half full class or something like that. But anyway, I thought this was interesting for us to talk about with Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio State, all up near the top in all of these. Rutgers as well in the 24/7. They're second in the Big Ten right now. I don't know if I've ever seen Rutgers second in recruiting in the Big Ten, so that's interesting to me. But Curt, we'll start with you first, man. Just what are your thoughts on recruiting right now in the Big Ten? Is there anything that surprised you? Anything that stuck out to you want to point out?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the obvious one probably, and I am going to pick Rutgers as the surprise right now. I mean, grabbing, 5 4-stars at this point in the game, pretty impressive. They had 2 in their entire class last year, and I think they're a top 10 overall class right now, according to 247. Granted, they do have a lot of commits, but, just a lot more 4-stars than they've previously had, and that's from Rutgers, who had previously, I think last year, I thought they were in the 50s. So being up that high, granted, it's early. A lot of these kids can change their mind. But I mean, they really went Ray Rice on the bit and punched out a lot of commits here and got some nice commits. So, yeah.
Great work by Greg Schiano. Zack, your thoughts?
He stole mine, Curt. I'm going to go with the obvious one, and that I think Ohio State is, they are doing what they need to do. Now, offensive line is probably the one key area that I'm like, you guys, Justin Fry, don't screw this up, because if he doesn't and they get guys like Sanders, we're not talking about a really good class. We're not talking about a possible top 3 class. We're talking about a generational class. And you're seeing it in several positions. It's not just Brian Hartline getting his wide receivers and a really good quarterback. I mean, if you look at the secondary, they have the top 2 corners in the country. They have a top 4 safety in Fahim Delane. They do have a really good offensive tackle in Carter Lowe, who they got right out of Toledo. The main thing is to keep adding to the class, and they got to hold on to the guys. So there's some smoke about Naeem Offord possibly flipping at some point, but I think he's going to hold. I think the reason why I'm picking Ohio State is not just that they're the number 1 team. they have the momentum to be a generational class.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're right up there. For as much as everybody talks about Ohio State's recruiting, I went back. I don't think Ohio State has ever gotten the number one class. I don't think a Big Ten team has ever had the number one class. So if Ohio State gets it this year, that'll be a first, obviously, for them, and then obviously for the Big Ten as well. So that would be really interesting to see. But you're right, Zach. It's going to come down to the offensive line for him. So Rajeev, man, your Badgers up there at 4th in the Big Ten, ahead of the likes of USC, Michigan, now an On-3. You're a little bit further down, but still in the top 8. That's impressive there. So what are your thoughts on Wisconsin's class so far? And then maybe just your thoughts in general with who's doing well in the Big Ten.
Yeah, so obviously I'll echo the sentiments on Rutgers. I mean, 27 commits. They've got 10 offensive and defensive linemen. 3 in additional to that, 3 edge rushers. Like Greg Schiano's doing his thing, right? He's building the base and building that structure on the inside, which is great. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a homer here. I'm going to talk about my Badgers. They're doing fantastic. I mean, we just landed our 20th commit today. We're I think we're in top 10 in the country right now on 247, top 5 on Rivals. That's going to come down because obviously it's, teams like Michigan and other teams that are going to come up. We have 20 commits right now. But Luke Fickell and his staff are closing. I mean, we've had 3 weekends of OVs and we've gotten some big commits. We just got a couple 4-stars this week. T.Y. Hilton's son is heading up to Madison. Mason Posa out of New Mexico, one of the top linebackers in his class. So yeah, I feel like we're looking really, really good. And Wisconsin fans are happy. I mean, we're talking about on our show, we're talking about recruiting class ceilings right now. I mean, are we really kind of top 15? I think we will finish in the top 15 nationally. And then how high can Luke Fickell's ceilings really go? Like, obviously he's changing the game in Madison, and year 1 wasn't exactly what we wanted, but we're very confident in years 2 and 3 and so on will be great. So yeah, very happy with what Wisconsin's doing. But you got to give credit to Rutgers. I mean, you got 27 guys and they talk about like their OVs. I mean, they've got a lot of commits in the last 3 weeks too. So they've done a great job, and Greg Schiano is clearly a closer, and it's working.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest parts about recruiting that gets overlooked. You can get a kid interested in you, but you got to be that closer. You got to know when is the time to really press into them and say, you need to commit now. You need to make this happen. I think there was a running back that Rutgers just landed, Forrester, something like that. That Rutgers got that, Michigan and some other Big Ten schools were, also in on. So, I mean, for Rutgers to go up against, the reigning national champion and get a 4-star running back from them, like that's very, very impressive.
We were looking at him as well.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin, I think Penn State might've been as well, but, he was a Big Ten guy who's probably going to go to a Big Ten school, and Greg Schiano was able to close on that after a visit, so good for them. Curt, I'll list off the bottom teams here for you, as I forgot to put them on the next graphic, but so forgive me. But on 3, here is 9 to 18. Nebraska is number 9, 10th is Washington, 11th is Minnesota, 12th is Michigan State, 13th is Illinois, 14th is Iowa, 15th Northwestern, 16th Maryland, 17th Indiana, 18th Purdue. So the whole state of Indiana really bringing up the pack here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Are there any names that I mentioned there, anything, Curt, that you're just like, man, they deserve some criticism right now. They're really not doing maybe as well as I thought, or they got to pick it up if they want to be doing better?
A team I'm curious about really is Illinois at this point. 9 commits so far, all 3-stars, which not really a problem there. I think a lot of them are actually higher 3-stars according to 247. I just don't hear a lot about their official visits or recruiting trail. It just doesn't seem to be a lot of hype. And given that last year was a little bit of a down year, a disappointing year for them overall after the year Bielema had 2 seasons ago, I'm just watching that class very closely to see how it shakes out, because if he doesn't have a good year and land a couple extra guys here, and maybe they just don't need a lot of commits yet this year. I mean, I feel like times have changed so much where 9 at this time used to not be that big of a deal, but now it's kind of like kids are committing faster and the signing dates moved up. So I'm curious how Illinois' recruiting class is going to shake out at the end of things, especially if they kind of get off to a shaky start in the Big Ten season.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to say I feel like Illinois has done this before, where they've kind of started out a little bit slower, and then they've gotten some commits towards the end. I mean, I don't think they, to my
He just
knowledge, I
seems
don't ever
so
remember
focused
Brett.
on basketball to me, as far as like NIL goes and whatnot. So I maybe they're going to be fine. I mean, Bielema keeps beating us, so
Yeah. They did lose out one recruit the other day. I forget. Maybe it was a running back as well. But Zach, your thoughts on some of the names that I mentioned there? If you want, I just put up the 24/7 composite one, and Michigan is 10th in that one, but it's pretty similar to the ones I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Michigan State 15th, Washington 16th. So any other thoughts there on teams that are near the bottom? Maybe need to pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michigan is a surprise. Just with, you would think they would have a national championship bump. And granted, there's a lot of moving parts there with Harbaugh leaving, and there's still question marks about the NCAA investigation, which we don't trust the NCAA as far as we could throw them. But that's besides the point.
Okay, so you guys give me your thoughts. All right, last week I took a lot of flack for this. All right, last week I said, which I thought was a very fair point, that the best thing for Michigan is if whatever the NCAA is going to do, what's large or small, whether it's a hammer or whether it's, a nursery rhyme, whatever it is, like large or small, it's better that it just happens, because sometimes this unknown is like the negative recruiting of it can actually be worse than what it actually is. Like, am I crazy to think that? Like, some people are like, oh, you're talking about the hammer is going to drop. No, I'm not. Like, I'm just talking about like other schools negatively recruit, and if that negativity has some mystery to it, you can make it sound like it's possibly worse than it is. I mean, am I wrong there?
No, the longer it's drawn out, the more it hurts Michigan, for two reasons.
In recruiting.
Yeah, because for one, if they get guys to recruit and then they get hammered, like, everybody's going to transfer. They're going to feel like Michigan sold them a bag of goods, right? But if they don't drop the hammer, you have all these people negatively recruiting, and so you're not going to get the guys that you want. So it stinks both ways, right? That you want a clear answer so people know what to, like, who you are moving forward.
And like how to combat it as well. Like Sharon Moore can go to recruits and be like, oh yeah, like scholarship production, who cares? Like, we do this with our NIL, so if you can technically be a walk-on and still have your classes paid for, I don't know, something like that. I mean, am I crazy, Rajeev? What do you think?
No, I don't think you're crazy. I think that's fair. But just to see it from the other perspective, they can also go out and say, look, we don't know what's going to happen. That's fine. Just come here anyway. And if we do get the hammer dropped on us, you can always transfer out, because in this day and age, we're all recruiting 1-year seasons anyway. Everyone's on a 1-year contract. So I feel like at this point, it doesn't really, I mean, I agree with you. I think in general, it's better for them to just have the decision made, figure out what's going on, and then move forward. But you can see it from the other side and just realize it doesn't really matter. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. Don't worry about that right now, because you can always make a decision later. But you want to take one of these spots, because if you don't take it, someone else is going to take it, and then you're not going to have a chance to come here. Michigan can always tell that story. They can always say, you want to be on this side of the coin. But I do agree that Michigan is surprising that they're where they are. I also think Washington, I mean, my goodness, I don't know what.
They're the other one.
Like, I know that they want a coaching change. I know that with DeBoer leaving, that's going to make some changes. It's going to set back the class a bit. But Washington is stepping into a whole new world in our conference. And they're bringing some of the big boys with them, but they've got a lot of big boys here they got to deal with. And I feel like Washington is kind of staring down this tunnel of potential, not irrelevance, but they're going to fall down. They're not going to be the big boys in the conference anymore. And I feel like if they don't take advantage now of the fact that they have just been in the playoffs and they're on this high, they need to use that bump and to get them a solid 25 class. Because if they don't, let's be honest, their wins are going to start dropping. They're not going to be a playoff team a couple years in a row, and that's going to hurt them. And I think they are at a really critical point of their future, based on the fact that they're coming to this conference, and they only are going to have this bump for the last couple of years right now.
That's true, and they don't have the money to recruit the way that Oregon does, and so that obviously puts Oregon at a larger advantage there. And as we know, I'm not trying to say all of Oregon's recruiting is their money. I'm not trying to be that guy. I'm just saying that Oregon is able to get guys up there a little bit easier with how they're able to pay them on their visits and stuff like that, because of the Phil Knight money. And unfortunately for Washington, they just don't have that, if we're being honest. So, Curt, my question really fast, and then we'll move on from there. Am I crazy? Do you see it that way as well, or are you kind of like it's not really that big of a deal, JR? I just need to move on.
No, I think you make a valid point, but I still think the main thing they're recruiting against is just the mass amount of turnover they had. I mean, Jim Harbaugh was the face of that program, so him jumping to the NFL and Sharon Moore just not being quite a proven head coach yet, I think is maybe the obstacle that's the largest thing in their way right now.
I will always bring up comments that start with JR is right. Thank you, LFG. The mystery around a pending investigation is perfect fodder for negative recruiting. I agree. So it's very, very interesting.